about miracle of the New Testament. Every gospel writer talks about it, and talks about it in pretty good detail. There's something about this miracle that catches people's attention, that had an effect. And there's a lot of different ways that we could talk about the feeding of the 5,000. But today, I want to consider it from the perspective of just one person, the Apostle Philip. Philip was a key part of this miracle. And today, I want to do something a little different. I want you to use your imagination today and think if we could go back and talk to Philip and have him tell us about this miracle. What might he say? He might start by telling us, of all the apostles, I was the finder. It's interesting because Jesus calls me to be his apostle. He calls me to follow him. And the first thing that I do is I go and I find Nathanael. I go find somebody else and I bring him to him. And he didn't want to come. His thought was, what good in the world can come out of Nazareth? But I told him, come and see. And he did. And look what happened. That's kind of the role that I filled, Peter was kind of our leader. Judas was the treasurer. I was the finder. Now on that day, we got to understand something about that day. Up until that day, it had been crazy. We had been so busy. For years we'd been going from place to place with Jesus. He'd been teaching, but something had happened. The crowds were growing. And we had gotten so busy. It got to the point that every day there was such a gathering, there were so many people that we couldn't even stop to eat. And we had just been going day in, day out. And finally Jesus said, we need a break. We need to go someplace, get off by ourselves, and take a break. But you know how it is, right? Whenever it's so busy that you can't even see straight, that's when everybody shows up more, right? That's when they keep coming. You know how it is in life. When it's overwhelming, that's when it seems like everybody needs another piece of you. And that's exactly what happened that day. This crowd comes to us. And it's huge. And we're all thinking we're supposed to be getting away from the crowd. But yet when they come up, you got to understand how Jesus was. Because when he saw that crowd come up, he didn't look at them like we looked at them as a burden. He looked at them and he saw that they were lost. He saw that they were hurting. He saw that they needed somebody. He looked at them like a shepherd looks at a sheep. And he let them come. And so there we were, and Jesus was teaching, and he was healing. And he was doing all the things that he did with the crowd. And as it always was, it took longer and longer and longer until finally we were at the end of the day. And as Jesus is out with the people, we as the disciples start talking to each other, and we realize we have a problem. The problem is we got a whole bunch of people out in the middle of nowhere, and we got nothing to feed them. Because remember, we were going to go somewhere else. We were on our own. We weren't thinking about what we were going to do that day. It just kind of happened. And so here we are in the middle of nowhere, and we realize that if we don't do something pretty quick, there's going to be a problem. Because there's not enough food to feed these people and take care of them. And there's a town down the road a little bit. If we sent them away, they could get there. And there were a few villages around. But when you got 5,000 people and you send them to a village, it just kind of overwhelms them, right? There's not enough food there to get them. So we have to start kind of sending people off, or we're going to have a major issue. And I don't know if Jesus heard us talking. I don't know what he was thinking. But he turned to us and he said, hey, we don't need to send them away. We need to feed them, get them something. And we all just sat there with our jaws hanging down. Because what are we going to do? And that's when Jesus turns to me, because he knew what I was. I was the finder, right? He looks to me and he says, where are we going to buy bread to feed all these people? And I just sit there and think, what? You know, my first thing I do is I start doing my math in the head, trying to figure out what it's going to be. You know, I'm trying to sit here and go, okay, we're going to buy. You know, years later, it was interesting because John was the disciple that Jesus, they were the closest. They thought alike. And John's the one that tells me years later, he says, you know, he wasn't really expecting you to feed these guys. He knew what he was doing. He just wanted to see what you'd do. I tell you what I did. I started doing the math. I started counting up and saying, okay, we got this many people. And if we went to a shop and we were able to buy bread, it's going to cost this amount. And so I started doing the math, and I'm thinking it's going to take almost a year, about half a year's wages to feed everybody here. And that's just giving everybody enough that they're not starving to death. Right? I mean, even if we had that kind of money, which we didn't. I mean, we were not a big profit organization. Even if we had that kind of money, there's no way we're going to be able to get it because there's no place to go get it. That's when Andrew speaks up, the big lug. He goes, well, some kid brought 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And I think to myself, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That's a dumb kind of idea that gives a stupid idea the will to live, right? What are you going to do with 5 loaves and 2 fishes and 5,000 people? I'm thinking maybe he's saying, you know, maybe somebody else brought some food. Maybe this kid brought something. Maybe some other people did. We can pull it all together and maybe get something for everybody. But I mean, even then, that's not going to be enough. What are you going to do with barely anything? It's not much different than having nothing. But then Jesus acts like that's the idea, right? When he hears him say that, he says, okay, divide the people up. And I'm thinking, why? How's this going to work? But we do what he tells us to do. We start dividing the crowd. We have set on the grass. There's a lot of grass around. Put them in groups, 50 here, 100 there. Dividing them up, trying to figure out how we're going to do this. Jesus calls us up there. He had these baskets. You know the little ones I'm talking about, the ones you carry your meal around in, right? And we had these little baskets, and he brings us all up there, and there's 12 of us. Okay? And he looks up to the sky, and he starts to pray. Like it's any other meal. Like we're not just about to disappoint 5,000 people. But then he takes those loaves and he starts tearing them apart and putting a little bit in each one of our baskets. There's 12 of us, 12 baskets. He does the same thing with the fish. He begins to tear it apart and put it in the basket. I'm sitting there thinking he's not even going to have enough to get it in every basket. But somehow he gets it divided up, and then he starts sending us around. And I take my little basket and I go to the first big group of people. And we start passing it around. And I start passing it down the line, and I'm beginning to think, a lot of people are going to look down there and see there's not a lot in that basket, and they're going to just decide, well, I'm not really that hungry, and pass it along. Some people are like that. But then I got to thinking, there's always that one guy who's going to sit there and go, oh, yeah, hey, and he's going to grab him a handful, right? He's not even going to think about the guy next to him. He's just going to get what's his, right? There's not very much. I better get enough of them I'm going to eat. So as they pass this basket around and it's worming its way back towards me, I'm sitting here thinking, what do I say to these next group of people? But then he hands me the basket. And it's still full. In fact, I even look at it and it looks like there was more in it than when we passed it around. And I go to the next one. And while I pass it around, I look across the way and there's Peter. There's Bartholomew, there's Matthew, and they're having the same strange look on their face. They're looking, and they're saying to themselves, there's still some left. And we pass it to the next group, and the next group. And every time the basket comes out and comes back, there's more than when we sent it. And we finally get to the end of it, and everybody has some, and we think, well, surely now somebody's going to raise their hand and say, hey, is there any more left? I didn't get any. But lo and behold, that didn't work that way. Everybody had enough. And we look down and every one of our baskets are still full. I did the math. 5 loaves, 2 fish, now 12 basketfuls. And that's when the crowd started to react. Because this kind of miracle, it's different. You know, I had seen Jesus do many amazing things, right? I had seen guys who were on the ground who had never walked their entire life, and he spoke to them and they got up and walked. I saw him go into a room where everybody's crying, and a girl had died, and a moment later he's leading her out the door. But in all those miracles, there was this point where you realized that it happened. But this one was different because it took everybody a while to figure out what was going on. Because they hadn't realized how short of supplies we had been. They didn't realize what it was until everybody started looking around and realizing, wait a minute. How did this work? And that's when they went crazy. The crowd starts talking, they start murmuring, they start saying things like, this is the guy, this is the prophet, he's from God. Of all the things that Jesus had done, of all the attention that he had got, this is the thing that sends them over the edge. And the next thing you know, they're coming up to Jesus and they're grabbing him, and it looks like they're just going to put him on their shoulders and drag him to Jerusalem, throw a crown on him and call him the king. We don't know what to do. And that's when Jesus stops us and says, y'all get in the boat. You go on, I'll take care of this. And he goes up the mountain a little way to escape from the people. We all off in the boat, and well, there's another story there, but we don't have time for that one. But you know what the funniest thing was of all this? The funniest thing about all of this was a few months later. A few months later, after we had seen what Jesus did, there was another crowd. This one was about 4,000 people. 4,000 people, and we had 7 loaves. The same thing happens. He says the same thing to us. And we reacted the exact same way. Let's feed them. We can't do it. And then he does. What's so funny is after he did that one, he was so frustrated with us. He was so mad at us. He looked at us and he said, do you not get it? Do you not understand? How many did we pick up when we fed the 5,000? 12 baskets? How many do we have left over now? We got these giant baskets. They're not the small ones, they're the big ones. We have even more. Don't you get it? Don't you understand? But we didn't. Even after he had shown us that he could take care of something we didn't think could be taken care of. Even after he had proven to us that what we thought was the limit wasn't the limit. Even after he had shown us that the problem that we couldn't solve, he could solve, the next time it came up, we went way back to our same assumptions, back to the same thinking, back to the same way. But you know what I found? I found most people were like us. Most people, even though he can solve it for them, they can't seem to trust him. So what's your problem? What's your problem? I know you have one. Maybe you're sure he can't do anything for you. Maybe you're overwhelmed because everybody needs a piece of you and there's just not enough to go around. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe you're hurting. Maybe you're alone. Maybe you're wondering. And you look down and you say, there's just not enough. There's not enough me. There's not enough stuff. There's not enough to handle it. Let me tell you something. When you think there's no way, He can find a way. When you think you're at the end, He's just getting started. And what's funny about us is we're so like that. We're so, when we see what He can do, when we realize His power, but yet we turn around and the next time it comes up, what do? We do the exact same thing. We worry and we fret because we think, what are we going to do? But let me tell you, no matter where you are, no matter what you got, He's enough. I don't know. Maybe Philip would have said it differently. Maybe we'd have told us a little bit more details than what we know. But I do know that when we read the story of the 5,000, what we're seeing is a miracle that does something more than just tell an interesting story. It tells us about the very nature of our Lord. That He wants us to come to Him. And He sees us how we are. Lost and hurting and in need. And He cares about us, not just about what we do for Him, but what He can do for us. And that when we think there isn't enough, and there is no hope, and there's no way, we need to stop and listen. Because He can do far more than we can ask or even imagine. I don't know where you are in your life today. I don't know what problem you're facing. I don't know what obstacle looks too big for you to handle, but I can tell you one thing. He can help you. He can guide you, and He can bring you to a place you didn't know you could be. He can take whatever's left over and make it enough. And He is the answer for whatever your problem is. To believe in Jesus is to put your faith in Him. That no matter what troubles come, no matter what difficulty you face, no matter how impossible it seems, that He can provide. It's putting aside your doubts and your fears and your worries. It's putting aside your old habits and your old ways. It's making that confession, a statement that I will believe. It's allowing Him to change you. If He can make 5 loaves and 2 fish enough, He can take you and He can remake you into something greater and better. He can make you one of His. Because if any man is in Christ, he is a new creation. So believe. Be willing to speak. Be willing to change. Be willing to follow. Be baptized so that you can be His. Maybe you're like those apostles and the second time around you're still doubting. You're still letting your fears control you. You're still keeping yourself from trusting to Him. Maybe there's something in your life that you need to bring to Him because He can handle it. And He's not left you alone without anybody else that cares. He has a family there that's willing to support you. So today I ask you, what's your problem? What do you need to give up? What do you need to get past? Where do you need to go? Because the only way that you'll get there is through Him. If you need to respond to the invitation of Jesus Christ, we offer you a chance to let that need be known right now while we stand and sing.